Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy Wallace and Maricella Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella Herrera. Maricella, welcome to the new year.
Yeah. Can it be over already?
No, it cannot, because this is our time. This is our time to be unapologetically happy. 2022 is going to be the year of you and the year of me and all of our listeners here today. We're coming together to support you in achieving those goals. And I am here to support you too, Maricella. So let's get excited.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a hard beginning of the year for me. So I've had a crappy week to start, but I agree with you. It's just getting started, and this is a marathon, not a sprint. I always talk about running, so I know that sometimes your runs go really, really well and you feel so great after it, and sometimes they don't. And you just have to keep running, because at the end of the day, it's good for you, and you're going to help get better and better at it. So I have had a tough week, but I do believe that this year can be a year where we put ourselves first, and that is okay.
It is a year to put yourself first. And, I think to surround yourself by people who can help you do that. I know. So Maricella, for our listeners, you've probably heard her be my chief no officer and has talked to me a lot about saying no to more things, and which makes space for me to then focus on what matters to me and to focus on where I'm going and my goals. And Maricella got me for the holidays this amazing mug that says no on it. And I just thought it was so appropriate. But as we look towards this year and kind of what are the steps we need to take in those actions, I just want to call out some of our roundtables. As many of you know, we do these weekly roundtables where you're learning from others, but then taking that learning into small breakout rooms to turn it into action, to just take that time to focus on you, to put yourself first, and to, learn and grow alongside others and to achieve these goals. And so upcoming roundtables that we have, Rising Leaders Roundtable that Maricella is hosting, is on this topic of no, knowing how and when to say no. So that's coming up this week. We also have workshops and roundtables for entrepreneurs on your 2022 business plan. And if you're in the midst of a career change, whether that's changing roles in your company, starting your own business, looking to find a new job, we've got a great roundtable on negotiating an offer at your brand new job. So we hope that you will join us for these important conversations this week. And as always, we continue to create space for intersectional identities, particularly within the LGBTQ plus community and within our community of Black women who are holding space for each other to create that support network that we need.
Yeah, I highly, highly, highly recommend going to the roundtables. They're great safe spaces and kind of structured in a way where you can feel comfortable. We're talking about a topic that will help you move ahead or reach your goals or really, even how to say no. That's an important skill we all should have. But a lot of the time of the roundtables is really spent on talking with other people. So you get to meet other amazing women in the community, and you also get to bring your problems forward and bring your challenges so that you can get ideas and best practices from someone else and share your ideas and best practices with them. And then the holding space forums, also highly, highly recommend. They're great for connecting with other people like you. They're completely safe spaces, no judgment zones, and they're really great for reflecting on all the different things happening in the world and how our intersectional identities are affected by them. So recommend. And Kristy, you didn't mention the executive roundtable. I know usually it is on Tuesday, so it's the same day as the podcast comes out. What are you talking about today?
The Executive Roundtable this week is talking about constructive conflict and accountability. It's something within the executive community we think about a lot, how to take those challenges and conflicts and turn them into action. And then the following week, we'll be coming together to continue that discussion and take it in a different direction around, the type of legalese that we need to think about as business owners and business leaders, as executives, and how to make those decisions that are in line with, best practices as it comes to legal planning. So many of these, I think, are important topics for executives. It's important for us to continue to learn and evolve as leaders, to navigate these tricky situations, and to come out on the other end in the best light possible, to use it as forward movement and progress for you and for your organization. And I just want to say, Ellevate's here to support you, to support women in the workplace. Our mission is to close that gender achievement gap to see women succeed. And what we've seen through 20 plus years of doing this is that it comes down to a few key things. It's one, the community that you're surrounded by, and not a community that's, just large but passive and very anonymous. It's about a community that is real, that goes deep, that's there to support you, where you're building true relationships. It's about that learning, the ongoing conversations and learning around the topics that keep you up at night, the skills that will help you achieve those goals, that the knowledge that will further your career. And more importantly, it's about that space, the space to then take these learnings into this deep, supportive community, to contextualize it for your own life, to get from this what you need, to not just talk about these issues, to not just talk about these challenges, to actually come up with an action plan for how to overcome them, for how to achieve those goals. What are those steps you need to take? And at Ellevate, with the roundtables, the squads, our applications are now open with our local communities and 40 chapters throughout the world. It's all about creating that space for you to have these real conversations. We do it every week on the Ellevate podcast, where we really want to learn from women leaders across a variety of industries and experiences. Get that type of inspiration, but know that every day Ellevate's working to create space for these real conversations that will help you to learn, to grow, and to succeed. And at the end of the day, we're lifting each other up, we're supporting one another, and we are going to change the face of business. So we hope to see you at an upcoming roundtable. Please know you're always welcome.
Absolutely. And Kristy mentioned briefly squads. Squads are part of the Ellevate program. We do 2 squads a year, and these are great opportunities. I think of them as a sprint, 12 weeks where you focus on your goals and really dig deep, whereas the roundtables, you can go each week whenever your schedule allows. This is, you meet with a group of women, same women every week, and set up 30 minutes for you to focus on you every week, which makes quite a difference. It's a great way to be, to break things down into smaller goals and to stay accountable to what you want to accomplish. So if you want to accomplish something this year, like we said, if you want to get if you want to make this year your own, Squad could be a great tool. Applications are open, and you can go to our website, ellevatenetwork.com/squads, and you can check out all the details about how a squad can help you and submit your application.
Yes, and if you're looking for inspiration, we've got a number of firsts to celebrate this week. We know that Kristen Hayden became the first Black woman to win a U.S. national diving title. I love diving. Let's celebrate Kristen. Susan Hudson became both the first female sheriff of Orleans Parish and the first Black woman to hold the job in Louisiana. Neely Bandapudi became the first woman and person of color hired as president of Penn State. Kathy Lester became the first woman as chief of police for Sacramento. And Disney appointed Susan Arnold as chair, the first woman to hold the title in their 98-year history. And why are we celebrating this? Well, I think there's two ways to look at these milestones. And one could say, well, what took so long? It's 2022. This is abysmal. But no, at Ellevate, we're all about positive thinking. We're about championing the successes of others and highlighting that and giving you the inspiration to know that you can do that too. We're all in this together. So we want to celebrate these milestones. Any progress is progress, but it's going to take a movement. It's going to take all of us together going for our goals, making this year the year for you to be unapologetically happy, to be unapologetically you, to go for what you want, and to know that this community is here to support you in achieving that.
Absolutely. The thing with first, and I think we're going to have to find a name for this little segment of firsts and celebration of first, because we will be celebrating first for women as they happen here in our podcast, so that we can, mark our milestones, I guess. Again, like Kristy said, look at some of the positivity and the good things that are happening. Which reminds me, did you read that article about how abysmal it's been for women, and how that's been in the news and the she session and all that stuff for the last 2 years? But we haven't really talked about the good things enough. And some good things are that a lot more women-founded startups are being funded, both last year, and we also saw some great exits and women reaching billionaire status, which just means that we'll have more women investors, which means more likely we will be able to see more funding going to women startups.
I love that article, that Forbes article, and it I think I loved it in part because it really talks to the ecosystem of things, and that's an important nuance. Within the executive roundtables at Ellevate, for example, we've talked about pivoting to start your own business. We have talked about investing in women-led businesses, about being an advisor or board member. It's about those numerous ways in which we can make an impact, both in our lives and the lives of others, where we can take action and really be proactive about that. And so talking about this ecosystem, but particularly an ecosystem where we're seeing diversity, not just with founders. We know women have been starting businesses at a disproportionate rate, like rock stars for years now, but really lacked the investment and lacked the that financial support. And that's been a challenge to overcome. And so how are we overcoming it? Well, we're getting more women to invest, because we know that we'll invest in the things that matter to us, the companies that are solving our problems, and in the people who we really admire. And that's so many of these business owners who are doing great work to create businesses, create opportunity for themselves, their families, and their communities. So this article is really great at highlighting that it takes change across many aspects of the industry to really see that impact.
Yeah, absolutely. It's happening. So it's not all bad things.
Yes, I love it. So this has been so great catching up with you, Maricella, and I wanted to talk today about our guest. Our guest is phenomenal. You're all in for an amazing treat. She just, I don't know, I really connected with her, and I know I do really appreciate so many of our guests, but Kristen Shaughnessy is someone I have watched for years on New York One. She's an anchor and reporter for 26 years. She was named Irish American Magazine's top 100 list, was chosen as one of the top 50 Irish American power women and the top media 30. She talks so much about storytelling and the power of those who are telling the stories to hold themselves accountable to what that impact is. We talk about the impact of media, and we talk about career pivots, particularly as many of us are thinking through our year plan or our future plan. Where are we going? Kristen's story and inspiration is really resonated with me, and I know you all find a lot to take away from it as well.
Kristen is amazing. She also was a moderator for Mobilize Women, plug, but she is great. I think not just with her career trajectory, but the guts it has taken for her and other people within her industry to fight preconceived notions and unjust practices. I think she's a real great inspiration.
All right, let's get to my interview with Kristen. Kristen, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast.
Kristy, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, I always get nervous interviewing media and news personalities because I tend to be long-winded in my questions, and you're always so direct and to the point. So I will do my best to be very direct. But Kristen, we always start off learning about our guests' stories and how they got to where they are today. And I would love it if you'd share a bit about yourself and your story.
Sure. Well, I actually grew up in a small farm town in upstate New York and without a television, but decided pretty early on, around 12, that I wanted to be a television reporter. I was watching some news reports where I could tell where a reporter stood on an issue, and I didn't like that. Ironically, because opinion journalism is all the rage these days, but it's not what I like. I like facts and just letting people make up their own minds about a story. So I pursued that at Hofstra University and then started in radio, actually. Could not find a job anywhere in the country in TV. And it turned out to be the best thing that happened to me was not getting a job in TV right away. So radio really helped me focus on writing and my voice and just being very quick in terms of turning stories. From there, I moved to a small TV station in Wappingers Falls, New York, right outside of Poughkeepsie. And I worked there for a couple of years. I was hired as a reporter, but then the main anchor left unexpectedly. And they told me, you have this job until we find somebody, because they clearly didn't think I was ready. And then in 1995, I was hired at New York One, which was very much in its infancy at that point. It had just started a few years earlier. I was one of the first outside hires on air. And, I was there for 26 years. And so it's sort of all I knew for more than 20 years. And for the most part, a wonderful ride.
Thank you for sharing that. And for our listeners who may not be in the New York City area, New York One is our local news station that, is a great resource for everything from, politics and news and life. And, I'm sure many of us have those stations in our regions. And as you mentioned, Kristen, I mean, the news has changed so much and influences us so much, how stories are told and what we hear. And I'm curious, how do you view this changing landscape of news and, and the role that you play in, the stories that make it, out there and the way that they're told? And I know there's a whole team behind that, but you're really the face of that. So what is your, impression of that, or how do you view it?
Well, I think when you're reporting, it's so important to just give the facts and let people decide where they sit on an issue. But it's important to give both sides of an issue. And I think as a journalist, if you're truly a journalist, you should be able to see that there are usually two sides to a story. And oftentimes I say the truth lies somewhere in the middle. But now we sort of become this opinion journalism, which I don't think is helpful, because voices get very loud on the extreme left and the extreme right. And people aren't listening. And I think listening is such an important quality. So I would hope we go back eventually. I don't know if it's going to happen. Right now, it just seems like a lot of voices screaming at each other and nobody really listening. So I always say to people, if you're watching a TV station that veers to the right or left, you should also be watching news that does the opposite, so that you sort of have both opinions, both perspectives. And then you can kind of form your own opinion from there. But to just listen to someone who is like-minded, that doesn't really help advance the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing that in our own homes, and seeing the impact of news and only, watching or listening to one side of the story on our loved ones, right? I agree with you. It's about seeing both sides and making up your own decision. But how have you seen journalism really change in the past, year and a half, where we've gone through, more than that, between elections, between pandemics, between social issues, environmental issues,
it has become very polarized. And, how have you really seen things change over the past year and a half, 2 years?
Yeah, I think it may even go further than that, only because of social media. Everything is so instant, and sometimes people don't check their sources. So there's a lot of misinformation that's being fed, and that is a problem if people just kind of take it and run with it, and not verify that they're getting the accurate information. So I think that's a problem. And then obviously with the pandemic, we see the division around the country just with vaccines. And it depends obviously on what news source people are listening to. It depends on their personal views about whether it's personal freedom or it's not. And people can make good arguments on both sides of that conversation. But the problem is, again, we're just sort of screaming at each other and not listening and saying, okay, I could accept this, but what about this? And just have some real insightful conversations that could lead to good things as opposed to just screaming.
Yeah. So, Kristen, I'll admit that I have been an avid watcher of the morning show with Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon on Apple TV. And
Too.
well, and it brings up so many of these themes that are reflective of real life. We've seen in the Me Too movement, media really front and center in news in that conversation. Also, it is an industry that's so focused on, particularly for women, this how you look and just how you age, and just all of these aspects of physical appearance as well. And so in that note, talking about the morning show, I'm curious, front and center in these conversations, we had Gretchen Carlson on the podcast a while back, is this idea of NDAs. And, we see it in other industries too, NDAs giving you the ability to, to advocate for yourself. And I'm curious how you see that, and what advice you have for our community who are also struggling with that question.
Yeah, it's interesting because the morning show actually picked up on the issue of NDAs when they were all trying to button people up. And I think there is a use for NDAs. You can make an argument for and against. I think when it comes to a company's proprietary information, absolutely. That is, they're building a business, they're building a brand. If it's proprietary, absolutely. But if an NDA is used to just, for lack of a better phrase, shut people up, I don't think it's helpful. And I think it advances bad behavior or encourages bad behavior, or at least doesn't make one worried about bad behavior. So in that sense, I don't think it's good. And I think people in general just don't think about NDAs until maybe they're forced with, say, if someone is leaving a company. We have spoken to so many women, and they're leaving a company and they're offered a severance, but they have to sign an NDA and they don't think about it. But that means they can't talk about their experience. So, but you need the severance to continue living, because a lot of times it's by surprise, and maybe they're offering them 3-month severance or a month severance, but you need that money to get by. You don't really have a choice. And you might not realize how stringent an NDA is until you're actually reading the fine print and kind of have settled down and realized what that means. So I think, Gretchen has done a good job in terms of bringing this to light, about what it means and when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate.
Yeah. And is there anything that individuals and employees can do around this? I mean, as you said, it's sort of being between a rock and a hard place, right? You need the severance, you want to separate from this, but then you're assigning away rights. There's been, I think, particularly in the tech community, a big, employee-led voice around getting rid of NDAs, and we are seeing some companies do that. But are there other things that an individual might do to protect themselves in this situation?
I think a person should definitely get legal counsel before they sign everything. But here's the problem. If someone is, say your company is having layoffs and you're laid off, you're typically going to be asked to sign an NDA, but you might not realize what that all encompasses. But all the emotions that come with that, you're not really thinking very clearly. You're just like, okay, what do I have to do to provide for my family or whatever? So I think the more conversations people have, the more they realize how they can really hinder a person's ability to either get a new job or to speak freely. Then I think, just with anything, the more conversations, the more people are aware of what NDAs are and what they actually, um, what somebody is agreeing to, I think would be surprising to a lot of people. There's no incentive really for companies to do away with them because it keeps people quiet. But the louder the voices are, maybe they would reconsider.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess back to that power of news and, being able to bring these issues to the forefront and talk about, steps we take. Another topic that comes up actually quite a bit at Ellevate and within our community of professional women is around seasoned professionals. Is we actually have a roundtable, a roundtable for seasoned professionals
Is that
to
code for older?
support one another. Yeah, yes, but seasoned. You have color, you have flavor, you have experience, and yet, time and again, we're hearing stories, and particularly, during the pandemic, as layoffs were disproportionately impacting women, but talking about ageism in the workplace, and it's everything from your appearance to how you're viewed as relevant and current, and it disproportionately impacts women. And is also touched on in the morning show with Jennifer Aniston. But how have you seen that impact women within media or more broadly in the workplace? And do you have any advice for those that might be experiencing that?
Yeah, I think it's a problem in the TV news industry overall and has been for decades. But I think it's a problem in a lot of industries for both men and women. We've heard from both men and women, for a while now. And experience and institutional knowledge matter. You can do your job more quickly. You can probably do it better. You might have better context, better reach, whatever. There's room for all different ages in a workplace. And I understand from a business perspective, businesses will argue, well, older veterans are more expensive. So, but as you said, sometimes it is based on looks. And if that's the case, is it even across the board? Are you're saying women that you work with are dealing with this? Are the men in their companies dealing with the same thing? In the TV industry, I could just say men are allowed to age gracefully. They're considered distinguished or, full of knowledge, experienced. Those are all really nice words, but a woman, I don't think you'd find a woman who has gray hair anchoring a main newscast. And I don't think we've seen that for decades. I actually did a TED Talk on this, and it was interesting just in terms of looking at the tech industry and the TV industry and all these different industries and what they deal with. They all deal with ageism on some level. In the tech industry, it's actually much younger. It's hard sometimes for people in their late 30s to get jobs because it's mostly 20s and early 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all over. And I think it's one of those issues that nobody really talks about. And the conversation has definitely widened over the last couple of years. But until it impacts a person, maybe they don't even see it. And maybe it's reflected in some other way. It's, we're doing layoffs. But again, I would say, is it even across the board? Are you getting rid of 20-year-olds as well as 40 and 50 and 60-year-olds? Or are you just getting rid of the older people? And are you getting rid of both men and women? Or are you just getting rid of women?
Yeah, I mean, it is such a nuanced conversation. When we talk about intersectionality and, diversity and inclusion within organizations and it is intersectional and age is as an identity. It's an aspect to look at if you are doing an analysis of your workforce, but it's also so impacted. I mean, as are many identities by perception and media and society. I mean, we're talking about media here. And just to your point, if you don't see someone who looks like you in a movie or on the news, then how does that directly and indirectly make you feel, and make you feel as if you have a place on that stage and included in that conversation.
Yeah. And you also, people are told to take the dates off their resume when they hit a certain age. So why is that? Obviously, because if they see a certain age, you're not even going to get a call back. We've spoken to women who are 45 years old. They send out their resumes, but they've got the dates on it. They'll never get a call back. So, I mean, occasionally, but not often. So I think there has to be a different way of looking at age, because speaking for women, if you're raising children, or even if you're not, but once your children are grown, when do you have more time to work? If you can balance a career and a family when the kids are younger, of course you're going to have even more time to work when you're older. So it's something that I think employers have to look at differently too. I actually just spoke to an employer who he's had his company for many years, and he said, well, younger people are more energetic. And that's something that you always hear about. Like younger people, it's sort of a crutch, I think. But I don't think older people are necessarily not energetic. And maybe they can do the job in maybe fewer hours than someone who's just learning the job.
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent point that the conversation does go both ways. We've make a point of not saying, if you're sharing out job descriptions or whatnot, like, oh, looking for a young, hungry, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Because you are immediately defining, characteristics based on someone's experience. And I think it does span, and it's got to be open-minded and, just be more accepting of all of the unique traits and values that individuals bring.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, it's sort of what you see, in the media too, just in magazines or online or whatever is reflected to you is your norm, right? Because that's what's presented to you all the time. So if we start normalizing getting older, I think Sarah Jessica Parker just recently had this whole thing in Vogue where she was saying she was sitting with Andy Cohen, who had a full head of gray hair, and nobody was saying anything about her, but they were appalled by her gray hair.
Mm-hmm.
And she's beautiful, and she's a successful, extremely successful actress. And she said, this just would not happen if I were a man.
Yep. It is so true. I mean, I think about that when, my husband and I both go on Zooms, and, he has a baseball hat on, or he's wearing a t-shirt, and I just did my hair and my makeup and, look presentable from, the shoulders up or whatever it is. But that just, and I, I have 2 young daughters myself. I think so much about the example I'm setting for them, and my mom, who is phenomenal, but she was always someone who had the makeup and the hair and the nails, and I followed her lead. And so we're influenced by so much in our personal lives and in media and society. And how do we kind of break the norm? Because not only is that maybe the standard you hold yourself to, but then that becomes the standard you hold others to as well.
It's, to that point, I was down south and I was walking on the beach, and I couldn't believe how many women passed me who had like these brilliant heads of gray hair or white hair. And like, that's not something that you see often. And we're seeing it a little bit more, which is, to me, is refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you want to color your hair or not is your own choice. But I just thought, oh, that's interesting that women now are feeling freer to do that. And I think it's great. And I think it will change the conversation, which is important. I also think it's important for men to join in that conversation. Men actually are victims of ageism as well. And I think it's important for them, if they see it, they should call it out, or at least be aware of it. And, it's like one of those things. Once you're aware of an issue, if you sit back and do nothing, that's on you. You shouldn't do that. But you can't say you didn't know.
Yep. Yeah, it's so true. So you're currently in the midst of a career pivot, which we love talking about here on the podcast. I think, for some, pivots are scary. It's an unknown and putting yourself out there, but it's also thrilling and exciting time to, redefine yourself or to take advantage of new opportunities or passions. And so I'm wondering how your experiences from your pivot, and do you have any advice for our community who might be looking to change professions?
Well, that's a good question. So I think initially it took me a couple months to kind of find my way, to work through emotions and all of that that comes with having a 30 plus year career, in a specific thing. And I never felt defined by my career. So I think that's helpful. Um, I think if you're in the working world now and you're defined by your career, you really have to figure out who you are outside of work, because it's just so important if something happens or you just decide that it's time for you to leave the workforce. But since then, it's been really enjoyable. Once I work through emotions and all that, I have always been into investing, and I've just been able to use the research that I put in as a reporter into that. So that's been fun. I did a TED talk, which was a challenge because I had like 2 weeks and I didn't realize you memorize the entire thing. so, so that was a challenge that put my old reporting skills to work. So researching for that, and then actually doing it during a pandemic because you do it remotely. That was a fun challenge for me. And then just sort of realizing, I think I'm someone who always realized life is short. You're not promised tomorrow or even the next minute. So I've always sort of had that perspective, but doing things that you really enjoy. I take a 5 mile walk almost every day, probably 6 days a week. That's stuff that I would do a couple times a week. I just wouldn't have time to do that. So that has been just sort of like enjoying the little parts of life. And, I was always so busy working, uh, that that's what I did. But I'm finding like I'm not, you think you might be bored if you don't, but you're not. Like there's so many other things to be doing. And I am working with 5 or 4 of my other former colleagues, and we're writing a book. So we want to help women in the workforce and men too. So that's been an interesting process, just to learn that process and see all that goes into it. And we'll see where it goes. Hopefully someone's interested enough that we'll be able to explore that even further.
So I had a career pivot a number of years ago, and to your point, like I did define myself by my career, everything. I mean, that was everything to me. And so when I left, it was really hard. I mean, suddenly I had no identity. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted, and it took me some time to kind of move into a place where you see the opportunity.
Absolutely. I completely understand that. And again, I say I wasn't defined by my career, but it's what I did for 30 something years. So to try to figure out, okay, how do I navigate each day? How do I enjoy free time? Like
Mhm.
that's a switch. And are you allowed to, Um, so it all has been such a work in progress. And I completely understand what you're saying, because I don't know how long it took you to, let me ask you how long it took you till you felt like, okay, I'm okay.
I mean, I think it took me at least like 3-4 months.
Yeah. Hmm.
And it just, yeah, I mean, just even, having to think about I mean, suddenly when you are like, okay, what am I going to do next? The possibilities are endless, right? You said, well, I could work in this
Right.
industry, I could do this job, I could do that, I could start my own thing. And that is also very intimidating because there's suddenly no guardrails, there's no clarity, and you have to work through all of that to kind of this process of elimination, which is, okay, nope, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do that, I'm not into that, and then start to narrow it down, because you go from a place where you were very clearly defined by a role, and that's how you viewed yourself and your success, and then suddenly you don't have that, and it can be really challenging.
And you wonder what skills can I offer to a different way of working, right? And what does work look like to me now? And do I want to work for a company? All those things that you question.
Hmm.
It really makes you very, I don't know, introspective. You really have to ask yourself a lot of questions to determine what you want next. But I'm glad you got to the other side of that. And it's a process that everybody goes through. I actually wrote a Medium article about it because it was interesting, people's reactions and your own reactions and working through all of that.
Well, and it's even, Kristen, back to we touched on a few times in this conversation around, society's definition and perception of things. And, I'll be honest, during that career pivot, the hardest thing for me was to, be asked, well, what do you do? And I was,
Yes.
I,
Yeah. How
I
do you
was
answer
like,
it?
I don't know. And it just was so
Oh, Kristy, I'm right there with you. Yeah.
but then, why is that, the question, and why do we, and that it clearly is how people are then going to define you. And why is that uncomfortable? Right. I mean, you don't have to be defined. I mean, you could say you do a million different things, right? I mean, you talked about a TED talk and writing a book, and like all of this is exciting, but yet I think we still feel like we have to qualify it in some way.
Yeah, or justify, right? And it's like I'm sort of gotten to the point, it's been whatever 10, 11 months. I'm sort of like I don't feel like I have to justify anything at this point, but you're right. In the beginning, it's a very strange, and I remember too the first time somebody asked me, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know how to say that. I'm working on it. I'll let you know.
So, Kristen, do you have any advice for our listeners who may be working in journalism or thinking about a career in journalism?
Yeah, I think you just have to. I think the facts matter, and I think good writing matters. It's the fundamentals that I was taught in school, and I think they mattered to a certain extent, but sometimes they're not as important. It's more like personality driven now, and I think you have to be the person people can rely on for the truth, and so they trust your reporting. And you need to write well. So if you were in journalism and you're just starting out, I would find an older reporter who you respect and use them as a mentor. Like reach out to them and say, hey, can you help me? Can you read this script? Can you help me with a lead? I just had a friend who she has done a complete pivot over the last 4 years. And, she thought her life was falling apart 4 years ago. And now her life couldn't be any better. So that's encouraging. But she's starting a reporting job. And so we had an hour and a half conversation about, just the certain fundamentals of journalism. And I think if we get back there, people will trust the media more. And I think that's important. Journalism is changing, though. It's very much going to go to a digital landscape completely, I think, at some point. Older people probably watch TV news. My girls who are 24 and 21, I don't think they've ever watched the news on television. They're on their screens or whatever. So it's just you have to evolve, as the industries do. And that can all be good because it's learning new skills and trying to stay on top of it. But again, finding a mentor, and I think for people in newsrooms, realizing there's value in having younger reporters who know different issues than older reporters, and also older reporters who can have that experience and institutional knowledge that can be so important when you're delving into different topics or story ideas.
That's excellent advice. And Kristen, I wanted to end kind of on a fun note, a little lightning round. I got some questions for you, if you would humor me. So are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I've had this conversation recently with some people. I think I'm actually an introvert in a lot of ways. Like my younger daughter said, Mom, you were built for a pandemic. And listen, we had nothing bad happen. So my condolences to everyone who went through such heartache. But in terms of being alone, I don't mind that. But then I can be an extrovert, with my career, I had to be an extrovert. So it's, I guess, a combo.
Well, I associate that too. I'm fine sort of kind of being on the stage or in, the podcast, but I definitely skew more towards alone time.
Yeah.
And quiet. And part of it is these conversations, do they sap your energy or feed your energy? And I find I'm always, lacking in energy.
Oh, that's interesting. I always say, like, I could be on a stage and there could be 1,000 people or 2,000 people in the audience, and that doesn't faze me at all. Like, I enjoy that and I think it's fun. But there was one time I was doing an event and my parents came to watch, and I was a wreck. Like, to do it in front of people that like very well, like intimately, who watched you grow up. I don't know. I was a bag of nerves.
Well, because they know you in a different way.
Yeah.
It's funny. What's your favorite day of the week?
My favorite day of the week. You know what? I don't know if I have one. I like Wednesdays. Those used to be like midweek for me. So I kind of like those. My weekends, I always worked weekends. So they had a different feel for me. So I don't think I have one necessarily, but just different days I find have different meaning for them. So I guess I don't have a favorite day, but I try to make every day kind of a good one.
Oh, I like that. Who would be your dream dinner guest?
Oh, that's interesting. Kathy Wood, who is, she's like an investing guru, I think. Like she's into, ever-changing technology. So I think that's interesting. And I know that you work with Sally Krawcheck, and I think she's fascinating too. And what she did for finances is really remarkable.
Yeah. Yes. And she's still doing with Ellevate.
I know. Yes, exactly. So helping women, learn their finances, which is so important.
It is. Do you have a top self-care practice?
Well, this is probably bad to even admit, but it was just a couple of years ago that I started taking my makeup off at night. I didn't realize I don't wear a lot when I'm not on air.
It's not that I'm laughing because it's like, yes,
really?
I absolutely associate. That is so real. It's so real.
I didn't even, my girls were the ones who were like, Mom, that's disgusting. What are you doing? And so now I take my makeup off every night. So I feel like that's pretty good. And, because I'm older, I'm 53. So I've started using creams and stuff more just to try to maintain.
Do you have a favorite cream?
I don't really. I have this, I can't even think of I want to say, anyway, it's like it's drops that you use. Sorry, I'm like stuttering because I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, it's just like drops with like a glossy cream that you put on your face. It's supposed to be good for aging. So.
Okay. All right. I know back to, all the stuff we're fed. I've got like a whole row of different stuff, and I'm not even sure if my husband has face wash, but
it's true, right?
I've got like a million different versions of everything.
So true.
And do you have any final advice you want to leave with our listeners here today?
I think just to speak up. I think you will see things throughout your career, and that's why, my 4 colleagues and I decided to write this book. Is we have spoken to so many women across the country, across the world, and the issues are all the same no matter what industry they're in. And I think it's important when you see something, you really have to speak up, because if you don't do it, who's going to do it? And then the problems just persist. So I think it's really important for people to find their voice and to make a decision, to speak up no matter what. And that can be a very, very difficult decision, but it will be worth it just in terms of getting people to think differently and see things differently.
Excellent. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Kristy, thanks so much for having me. I wanted to ask you all these other questions. The journalist in me, I was like, I want to find out about your twin sister, Katie, and I want to find out about you being a financial analyst, but we'll do that another time.
Yes.
Turn the tables and I can interview you. That would be fun.
That would be fun. Join us back here next week for our episode with Miriam Grubman, where she uses data and stories to help global leaders make better decisions. And that will be a special interview with Maricella.
Yeah, I get to interview one of my favorite nerds, Miriam. So I promise you it'll be fun.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes. Give us 5 stars and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at EllevateNTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.